when I wake up in the morning, depending on, what the day is like, mornings just are, they're tough. Mornings are the worst part of my day. On a good day, I get up and I could be normal, like a normal person would be. But a lot of times I wake up in a complete state of anxiety and panic. I open my eyes and the first thing that comes to mind is, how am I going to get through this day? Here we have a room full of people that paid good money to attend this medical conference, to hear presentations that more than one person in that room described as life-changing. And they were topics presented by some of the most distinguished and skilled physicians in the New York tri-state area. They're talking about an issue of such importance and gravity that is being denied and pushed out of the public eye. And this whole event was orchestrated by somebody completely outside the realm of the medical community. And the institutions that should be providing this information are not.
And they keep saying, this shouldn't be happening to me. I should be feeling better. And then their family says, you shouldn't be feeling this way. And their employer says that, and their friends say that, and their doctor says that, and their insurance company says that, and the medical profession says that. So they feel kind of abandoned and lost, and they feel like something is taking over the body. They don't know what it is, they don't know what to make of it. And then they go around sometimes from one doctor to the next, and they may be told, well, you have subjective non-specific symptoms, they're medically unexplained symptoms, so it's probably psychiatric. Body to a psychiatrist. And it's probably an imaginary thing that you have, you'll have a hypochondriac. And then they kind of get lost in the system and go around in circles somewhat. Eventually trying different things, they may do an internet search, and then they may eventually find that Lyme may be behind it, and then they pursue treatment, and then they get into this controversy that surrounds all that they really weren't looking for, but so that's kind of the typical case that you see. And it used to be, I think my record was, I had one person who had seen 57 doctors before he found someone who had a handle on it. I had someone this week who was 30 doctors, but now it's usually rare.
Yeah, good question. Past infection versus ongoing infection, I think they're more static. Whereas if it's ongoing infection, you get a gradual worsening of symptoms. They keep getting worse and worse and worse over time in spite of your treatment. Versus an old infection like a hit and run infection, and it's harmed your neural transmitters or circuitry, and it's just static, it stays the same. But if, let's say depression, if it's the same level of depression, but if it seems like you keep doing more and more and more, and the depression keeps getting worse and worse and worse, there's something pushing it in the other direction. That makes you think there's some disease process going on, such as infection or some other thing that's driving disease progression instead of it being static. Yes?
May well be, that I should test them for tick-borne disorder. And by the way, do you have any stretch marks on you? And as Dr. Bransfield said, the one thing you get with Bartonella is stretch marks. And then his parents showed me. He had a bunch of them on his legs. which is very consistent with Bartonella. I got a variety of testing on him. He did not meet, on my testing, he did not meet the CDC criteria for Lyme, although he did have, by hygienic standards, he did. He also, though, did have a positive PCR test for Lyme, done by advanced labs. And that's a pretty specific test. They don't get many false positives. Unfortunately, the doctors in the state that he came from refused to accept that this was Lyme. Well, and he decompensated, wound up back in the hospital, and finally the infectious disease doctor said, okay, we'll try a little bit of doxycycline. But they gave him a low dose, and they also did it at the same time as the psychiatrist was changing the child's meds. So the kid was a mess. Maybe there was something better after 2 weeks, but it was very hard to see. And they said, that's it, forget it. Forget this giving him, giving him antibiotics. Go back to the psych meds. Okay. Well, then this child happened to participate in a study at Columbia about psychosis in children and adults. And his test from a different lab came back CDC positive. So once again, it's more evidence that this kid's got Lyme. The infectious disease people weren't buying it. But I knew it was true. So then I tried to get him a doctor to take care of him. And that was asking people all across the nation. And most said no. And why did they say no? Because they knew that this kid could not be treated with antibiotics without a good chance of him getting worse in his Herxheimer reaction before he gets better. So the Herxheimer reaction is when you give somebody antibiotics and you get a bit of die-off and the toxins are released and you get an increase in symptoms. Well, if this kid has an increase in symptoms, it's not going to be in his joint pain. He's going to be psychotic as anything and harder to control. So
It was worth all of the stress and heartache that I went through to do this. And believe me, there were days where I was contemplating suicide because the thought of dealing with it was just overwhelming. And I had to find a way to get past it. And time is the big thing. You have to just allow yourself and grant yourself the time to ride out that storm. You just have to be able to say, I can't do anything today, but just be.
My name is Armin from Germany. I'm a medical doctor and specialist for laboratory medicine, and I care for chronic Lyme patients, how to diagnose and how to treat. And I'm doing testing for lots of patients and help therapists around the world.
Why are you here today?
I'm here today because it's a very important thing to look at the neuropsychiatric issues of these patients. A lot of these patients have depression, schizophrenia, or some other cognitive dysfunctions, and I think laboratory could help to diagnose and also to assist the therapists.
Okay, thank you. Are you presenting, are you here with a drug company or?
No, I have a private laboratory. It's localized nearby Munich in Germany, and I'm working in the field of Lyme disease for nearly 20 years now. Also, I diagnosed my own patients in my facilities and also try to help them to bring them to good therapists around the world.
Thank you. Could you just talk about some of the challenges that you're facing? Are you having problems with people listening to the severity of this issue?
The problem is how to diagnose, because an ELISA is not enough to diagnose. ELISA is very weak sensitive, that means very often false negative. So 70% of the patients don't show antibodies in the blood. But we have modern testings, we can do the ELISpot or LTT, and we can diagnose on the T cells and not on the antibodies.
And what is given little attention to is the challenge of Lyme. The indivisible disease that literally goes tick-tock, tick-tock. And it is the disease of diseases. Because if it had a sense of consciousness, if diseases had a sense of consciousness, they want to be Lyme because it is the great indicator of folks with symptoms of fatigue, vertigo, nausea, exhaustion, hearing problems, cognitive impairments. And often, and way too often, it takes the course of many doctors and sometimes, unfortunately, many years to find out it was Lyme all along. I'm here to make it clear that this is not a political issue. This is a real issue. This is a real life issue which requires immediate attention and real life solutions. We need strong investment and dialogue, such as events like this across the nation, and in communities that are struggling with this, not just here, not just in Connecticut, but throughout the nation, and create awareness.
Really important to utilize this amazing organization that Geo created, the Our Revolution New Jersey Volunteers, because the Lyme effort is really a grassroots effort. It's patients coming together and fabulous doctors, this group of doctors that are pouring their energy into making a difference in this epidemic. And having the opportunity to change politics with this issue is huge for me. Having you here is just beyond important.
Yeah. No, it's an honor to be here, and it's exactly what you said. This is a grassroots effort. We heard about Zika, we hear about HIV, diabetes. This is something else that has kind of gotten unnoticed, and it's impacting so many millions of Americans. There's an estimated 400,000 new cases every year of Lyme. That's a big deal, especially in our area. You consider climate change and its impacts, and things are going to get worse. And I think we need to be ahead of the curve here. The fact of the matter is, we need to understand what's going on with Lyme, for one. So we need to invest in research, and we need to ensure that we have our physicians empowered with the knowledge as well as the ability to advocate for their patients so that they know what's going on, and then they could go and represent what are the actual needs of patients. And we need to strengthen patients, and we need to ensure that we listen to what's going on with patients. All too often, the fundamental problem I think with Lyme is because it is a great imitator of other diseases and illnesses and other ailments, fatigue, bipolar disorder, cognitive impairments, it is overshadowed. So if we educate patients, if we educate doctors and our community at large, teachers, school kids, we start thinking about it more, and that's exactly what we need to do. And thank you, Linda, for starting the effort.
Thank you.
Trying to make that up. And there's two ways. When I hold retreats for people dealing with chronic illness. There's two accesses to it that I like to use. One is the direct path, which is the surrender. Like, who are we? Like, if you actually sit and do this experiential exploration of who am I actually? What is this body? You find out it's really only a sensation. So there's the direct path. And the other is to have a look at how we are emotionally responding to something and then just drill down through that. Because you go all the way down, you're going to come back out to the nothingness, which is awesome. It's just an indirect path. The more we do something, the better we get at it. So the more we tell stories and don't stop telling stories, the better we get at the stories. The more we notice that we're telling stories, the better we get at noticing the stories, the quicker we can be to hesitate before we go with the story. Or we might just go, hey, this is the story I made up about it, and it's just a story, but this is how it feels right now. I'm a victim, and just wallow in being a victim. There's no wrong. But when it's disempowering us, and we take responsibility for that, we have now disempowered ourselves, right there it's empowering. That's a choice. So we create our experience We're creating the actual experience we're having. And what we're always trying to do as human beings is avoid the negative feelings. But actually, that's not what life is. Life is the full spectrum. So when we surrender to the experience exactly as it is, we just flow through it. You know, maybe we don't want to revisit feeling desperate, but you know, part of life. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Why I chose to do this conference is an interesting interesting story, I guess. I volunteered at an ILADS conference and sat in and had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Bransfield talk about the impact of Lyme on the brain. And I had also seen other videotape presentations of his discussions. And they were life-changing for me. Just as people told me after the conference that it was life-changing for them. And I knew it would be, and that's why I did it, because it was life-changing for me to sit down and listen to several distinguished physicians explain to me what was happening inside my head, and giving me a reason to be able to accept myself as a mentally ill person, because there's a reason. I mean, there's this pathological illness. This is a microbial infection. This is a disease. This is what mental illness is. And it helped me understand why I would have these suicide ideations.
Thank you. Thank you, Enid, very much. Our next comments will come from Susan Green.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your service. My name is Susan Green. I'm an attorney, and I've been practicing law for more years than I admit at this stage of my life. I also am a Lyme patient. Approximately 10 years ago, I was in the middle of a trial. I had a seizure. I lost my ability to speak and retrieve language, curled up in a ball, and all of my limbs were twitching, and I would remain that way. My memory was completely wiped out. I would remain that way for quite some time. I went to doctor after doctor, same story. Nobody knew what was wrong with me. Finally, I begged a doctor to give me antibiotics. He was an infectious disease doctor. He said to me, "You don't have Lyme disease." He says, "But you're so hysterical, I'm going to give you another test, and I'm going to give you the antibiotics just to calm you down." Very reputed doctor, John Hopkins. So he gave me the test, and he gave me the antibiotics. You can imagine his surprise when several days later, Wednesday at 6:30 in the morning, he called me, told me I was off the charts. I had had 4 prior tests. They were all negative. I went to his office, and I had the most unusual experience. He leaned across his desk, and he pushed a barrel of antibiotics at me. And he said to me, "I can't treat you. You're a very, very sick woman." And he said, "But I would be drummed out of my society if I were to treat you with long-term antibiotics. I'm very sorry, you're going to have to find another doctor." And I went from state to state looking for a doctor who could take care of my needs. It would be 20 months of IV antibiotics and 72 hyperbaric oxygen dives before I would resume my ability to speak. I do believe I would be dead today. but for the doctors who risked their licenses to treat me. We have a terrible problem. As an attorney, I told all these doctors, if you get me back my ability to speak, I will help you, because these doctors come under attack from medical boards on a regular basis. They come under attack simply because they prescribe long-term antibiotics. It's insane to me that a child with acne can get a year of antibiotics to treat their skin, but a person with a progressive and potentially fatal disease cannot get treatment for more than 28 days, because we are the only population that seems to get the superbugs. It doesn't make any sense, okay? So I defend doctors' licenses before the medical boards. Many patients who saw that their doctors were going to be in jeopardy of losing their licenses have gone around the country and passed laws to protect doctors who prescribe long-term antibiotics. Everybody, the whole community would celebrate when these laws were passed. But I'm here to tell you that it hasn't stopped the medical boards. Because what they have done now is they go around and they charge these doctors with, they hold them to a higher standard of care. They engage in a discriminatory practice of singling out these doctors based solely upon the type of medicine that they provide. And now they will go into their charts, they'll hold them to a higher standard of care, and they'll charge them with coding violations, record-keeping violations, and they are still in danger of losing their licenses. They spend exorbitant amounts of money defending themselves just to be able to serve the community. I ask that you unfetter the hands of these doctors who are on the front line of battling, trying to find a treatment and help these very sick and marginalized people. Thank you.
Next comments will come from Linda Osborn.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, and I'm delighted to see this collaboration of individuals working on this tremendously important issue. My name is Linda Osborn, and I am a resident of Hunterdon County, New Jersey. I live with my husband of 23 years and my 19-year-old daughter, who is currently attending University of Delaware. If it wasn't for finals, she would be in attendance with me. My story is similar to the many you've already heard. I was misdiagnosed for probably at least 2 decades, maybe longer, due to false negative results produced by recommended 2-tier testing. The exact time frame of my infection is unknown, but I do recall when I was about 10, my parents removing an embedded tick from my head, and that was in 1974. I was 10. I don't recall a lot of details from that time, but I do distinctly remember that year I received my first C on my report card. And I was pulled aside by my teacher for some moral support and TLC. I was off, and she could see it. Let's fast forward. In my early 20s, I spent many hours rock climbing, hiking, mucking about the gunks in New Paltz, New York, and in Vermont and other parts of New England. I was always outside. And it was then I started noticing some cardiac symptoms. By my late 20s, I became depressed and shortly thereafter was diagnosed as bipolar. I believe that that diagnosis set the trajectory for the next decade of horrific experiences that I had with MDs and specialists. What happened is my mental health was designated as my illness, when in reality, my undiagnosed illness was causing my mental and physical decline. Where my story diverges from others is that I did have a very difficult childhood. There was in fact a degree of mental dysfunction that resulted from the challenges of my earliest years. I was a product of my environment, and therefore I accepted my diagnosis and continued in a downward spiral with a growing list of physical symptoms and behavioral changes. But here's the key point. Despite the challenges that presented my life in my first 20 years, I was never suicidal. I was bullied, I was teased. But at that time, there was no internet. However, guess what? There were bathroom walls, and that was the 70s and 80s version of Snapchat. The key point here is that I became suicidal once I got into the advanced and late stages of Lyme disease after not having been diagnosed for over 20 years. And what made that insult to injury worse was that I infected my only unborn child through pregnancy and or breastfeeding. So as I lay in my bed, uncomfortable in my skin, misery with trying to get through the treatment of this insidious disease, I wanted to kill myself. But I couldn't, because I had to stay in this world long enough to be able to help my daughter through this insidious disease, and at the same time contemplate whether she was also having suicidal thoughts. Gentlemen in the room, I would like you to sit and think about your wives and your children, and think about what it must be like to wonder every day when you come home from work whether you're going to find your wife in bed dead from an overdose or your child swinging from a tree in the backyard. This is the reality of what this disease does to people when it is not diagnosed. And I will add, I did see an LLMD, and I did go for alternative testing, and I was tested positive for Lyme, for Babesia 1, for Brucella, for Mycoplasma pneumo, for HVV6, for an MTFR gene mutation, for Candida overgrowth, high levels of lead, high levels of mercury, adrenal failure, kidney failure, liver failure. I did extensive antibiotics that brought me back to life. I was pulled out of the grave. But I will tell you, I'm not cured either, and nor is my daughter, who finally tested positive after several rounds of antibiotics. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Jennifer.
I open my eyes, and the first thing that comes to mind is, how am I going to get through this day? And, you know, I'll get up, and before I do anything, the dog and the cat are my first priority. I let the dog out to do business, and while she's out, I fix her breakfast, and I make sure the cat has food, and once that's done, then I take care of myself. But, you know, as I'm going around and just doing these rote activities, my brain starts spinning in a million different directions when I think about what I have to try to accomplish and whether I'm going to be capable. And that's the hard part about living with this, is you never know what you're going to be capable of doing on any given day.
Our program to bring you a special broadcast.
Red lights, red lights. Punks for nothing. Punks for nothing. I'm against nothing.